Hello and welcome to Thinking Out Loud. I'm your co-host, Nathan Rittenhouse.
And I'm your co-host, Cameron McAllister.
I don't think I've ever actually kicked a hornet's nest. I've done a lot of interesting things to hornet's nest. I don't think I've ever kicked one. We use that phrase when we think we're about to do something that could stir things up and backfire on us. And that's not what I'm trying to do here. I'm trying to gain a little bit of clarity with a question that I'm about to ask you. And for some time, I've been trying to figure out the theological foundations and justification for free speech. Now, that might be a shocking statement to some of you because we largely and very pro free speech right out of the gate. I want to say that. I think Cameron would fit in that.
Yeah, of course.
We would say that's one of the fundamental beauties of what it means to be an American, is that the freedom of speech is, but it's such a thing that we see to be so good that we kind of don't know what to do with it when it goes sideways. And I think in some odd way, we do link it to our Christian faith, if you're an American and a Christian or other parts of the world that have that value. And so I'd like to play around. I think where I'd like to go is play with some of the issues or some of the places where we see there being issues in our culture right now, and then get you, Cameron, to help me bore into kind of the theological roots of why there isn't a technological solution to some of the things that, because technology seems to be what's pitched to us as the savior of sorting out and saving free speech, but it also causes a lot of problems. And so let's jump into this with where's the conversation at right now on free speech? And then we'll try to figure out how to make sense of that as a Christian issue and what are, to the degree that we should embrace something perhaps without worshiping it. If that's the direction we should go, but let's go. Free speech, it's everywhere. Give us a couple examples that pop into your mind.
Yeah, I think the first trouble for a lot of us continually is that the Bible itself, of course, is not a modern document. And so it's not going to directly address some of our modern issues. We'll just put that out there as sort of a framing device for the conversation. With regard to free speech, we've got a number of different issues that we haven't had in the past because of the immense proliferation of information that is possible because of the net, right? The internet. So I think that has brought to the fore free speech in new ways because, again, we're dealing with technologies that move so fast, it's hard for us to catch up. So a couple of specific examples that come to mind would be, I think it's worth talking about classified information or information that's not, it's not deemed available. It's not supposed to be available to the public. We've had a number of different high-profile cases of people who, in the interest, have framed leaking classified information as a way to keep the public informed. And some of these people have been imprisoned for this. And so I think you've got that. You've got highly available, sometimes classified information.
Well,
yeah, go ahead, Nathan.
I was going to say, I think let me give you the actual lingo here. Do I have this still pulled up? That if I'm looking at the Constitution here for a second. So let's see. If what I'm wondering is if the way in which the Constitution is written on like the not abridging speech part, does that apply to the government itself, or is it saying that the government won't restrict an individual's right to do that? But if you're an employee of the government and then you're speaking on behalf of the government, it seems to me like there could be a contractual way around that that's pretty easy to say. Part of the job that you have, say, is from a wiki link. Well,
of course.
That won't count. But
no, there are.
So I think there are contractual things that you can get yourselves in that precede and jump over the individual right to just say
all I'm doing is pointing out some of the complications that we're running into, and that's one of them. Because it's easier now than ever to make classified information available, especially for insiders. But there are clear laws surrounding that. But that's one of the challenges we're facing. Another big one, I think, and this pertains particularly to religious people, surrounds hate speech laws. And we're seeing some of this in places like Canada, for instance. So prohibitions on sexual behavior for, with, on a particular, whether it's Christian or Muslim, increasingly there's a push to make this, to label this as hate speech and thus make it illegal, and then push for, legal consequences for this kind of speech and these kinds of rules. Obviously, that's going to affect everybody who is a devout, practicing religious person, especially if you think about the three great religions, Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, all of which are agreed in the sexual ethics are somewhat similar there. So that's another big issue, and you're seeing more and more of that. Yes.
I was going to say, particularly if the way in which your church does marriages, your minister is also an agent of the state. So you'll hear, as a minister, as a minister of the gospel in the state of whatever, I pronounce you.
Yes.
That's where it gets tricky, because once again, you are you're employed by, so to speak, and there's no money, but you're an agent of that legal system that's making that decision in the way that some marriages are performed. So, okay, I'll give you, that's another problem, has been problem. All right, give me a news item. I'm thinking of two that you haven't gotten to.
Well, I mean, one would involve probably one of the most innovative and interesting figures of our moment, and Walter Isaacson's just written a biography of this guy. So you could, if you haven't figured this out yet, this is none other than Elon Musk, and especially his whole work with the artist formerly known as Twitter, X. But yeah, and most of the issues surrounding Twitter have to do really with free speech, actually, and I think right now one of the latest developments was that he allowed Alex Jones back onto Twitter. Right. And for those of you who don't know, Alex Jones was, I think it was InfoWars that was the name of his show, I believe it was InfoWars. He's a known conspiracy theorist. I mean, he's a highly controversial figure, and people, and for very good reason, people are very apprehensive about him. He's the one who he has argued at length that Sandy Hook was a hoax. He's actually been sued by some of the parents of the children. So just a nasty guy. Okay, let's just be honest.
Can I put a bracket in here? Because this brings back a funny memory. It's not funny.
Do it. Oh yeah. I was wondering whether you bring it up. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So the other organization that we once
speaking of hornets nests,
speaking of hornets nest, where Thinking Out Loud began, we called Alex Jones a conspiracy theorist, because we quoted from a video of something he said, and one of the donors of the previous organization took offense that we had called Alex Jones a conspiracy theorist. And we're like, we're not giving money to an organization that call Alex Jones a conspiracy theorist. And you and I were like, great. We're happy to lose your support. And here's a link to him saying the thing you're claiming so that didn't go over so well. But anyway.
Yeah. Well,
that's probably why it's better we're independent.
Actually, that example, but it's also pertinent because the argument, and I remember reading, that was a lengthy email. And I remember reading it carefully because I wanted to know, how are they good? How would they actually defend somebody like Alex Jones? And so he was being presented as a paragon of free speech. That was one of that was a specific item. And so it's interesting to see that there. And part of what Elon Musk is dealing with now is, and it's to set this up, it's worth pointing out that he is running into all sorts of trouble. And I'm not a tech savvy guy. I'm not a business insider, but essentially a lot of the advertisers are going to pull away from X. All right. And that will make X no longer viable if he loses all the advertisers. There was a highly viral moment that he had, looked more like a breakdown, sort of a little bit of a mental breakdown to me on national television, where he had some colorful words for the advertisers who were threatening to poll. Essentially, he told them to be fruitful and multiply in different words. But this is one of those issues where strategically, so to his mind, X, you're going to have all those perspectives in there, including Alex Jones's. Hey, free speech just means you need to tolerate some cranks. All right, get over it. And that's the end of the topic for him. But because of the public perception, that becomes a PR nightmare. And then advertisers don't want to be associated with a platform that would, that would give any kind of voice to somebody like that. So they begin to pull their support. And now you have a big strategic problem.
So,
But I think moderating these big social media online communities, that's another place where speech becomes free speech. I mean, any social media site that you join is going to have community guidelines. So Nathan, can I put one argument on the table here just real quickly, and then let's run with it, and you run with it.
Mm-hmm.
So I often hear free speech invoked with regard to something like X, formerly Twitter. Well, yeah, but you join X. It's not real. I mean, you are joining a specific community that you didn't make. So therefore, you do sign up for the community guidelines. That comes with the package. It's a package deal. Same with Facebook. Same with all of these others. And you often I hear censorship a lot of times. Oh, they're crying censorship. Oh, it's especially during COVID. Remember when around 2021, especially, if anybody posted anything that questioned the efficacy of the vaccines, for instance, Facebook had special notices that would either the post wouldn't go up, they'd take it down, or they would put a warning on it saying the information that appears in this link is not scientifically accurate or has been called into question by the scientific community. I mean, it was a very you'd have measures like that.
Still, any YouTube video you watch that has anything to do with climate change, whether they're speaking for or against, sideways or tangentially about, is going to have a label at the bottom where there's somebody who cares that the context of what everybody else thinks about you for watching this video. So yeah, but I mean that's within the prerogative of the platform.
So there you are. Yeah. So I think that's the other big place. Is there another news story I failed to mention?
So Ivy League presidents and Hamas, and go.
Right. Yeah. Well, so I mean, I'm going to be blunt on this one. I think there's a whole lot of cowardice going on with the hesitancy to condemn the actions of Hamas here. I think we can now. That doesn't mean that you have to have a totally, that doesn't mean you automatically side with Israel and everything necessarily. I think you can admit that there have been massive casualties on both sides, that that this is a very politically complex situation. But nevertheless, the attack perpetrated by Hamas against Israel was absolutely and is absolutely heinous. And the atrocities that have been carried out are horrendous. And the problem is, Nathan, and I'm going to speak as clearly as I can and take it with a grain of salt, because this is Cameron McAllister talking, and I'm a human being. I make mistakes. But it seems to me, Nathan, that a lot of these issues, especially with regard to this particular issue here with Ivy League presidents who are hedging their bets, so to speak, and some, let's face it, some professors who are actually abusing, I think, their position with students and writing highly manipulative documents that are pro-Palestine and fomenting riots and all sorts of stuff like that. But the what will be said often about some of these presidents is that maybe they're trying to be careful. This is an ethical kind of consideration. I don't think that's what's happening. I think this is all PR for a lot of these people, especially college presidents who it appears to me, Nathan, at least from what I'm seeing, these people just want to make sure that their constituency is appeased and that they are consolidating their office and that they're not offending the wrong people. That's awful. That's pretty terrible. And that points up a whole host of other issues with the whole educational system right now, the way it's treated more as, Nathan, the way you phrased it earlier, was as a commodity or something like that. That I think that is basically, it's been in the works for a while, but where you look at education as a commodity and the students as clients, and you're paving the way for a whole different approach to so much of this. But that's, so I've said enough I've stirred up enough hornets here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
to get us going.
If I was looking for a common thread among some of the things that we've outlined here, I think what we actually desire, and I'm using the we here in maybe a broad American cultural sense, is we want the ability to say whatever we want without there being the logical consequences of our speech attached to it. So you have the right to say something that could get you killed. Like, or you have the freedom to say bad ideas, but so it seems like what we're trying to, like, in the worst way to look at it, we want to be able to say whatever we want and then be protected from the consequences of the things that we've said. And that's not what free speech means. But it almost feels like,
Right.
hey, I want to say whatever pops into my mind, but then if you push back against what I say, then it's like you're anti-free speech. It's like, or I could just think that you're let's use a Greek word, a moron, and I'm treating you as such. So is that, am I the only one seeing that, or is that kind of like we say something when we're surprised that has a
That
reaction?
kind of double
Where does
standard?
that come from? Yeah.
Well, I think a lot of us, are beholden to what I would call cultural orthodoxy, the set of values that are kind of popularly established, and it's a little bit of a moving target at times. So this is an age where it's very, you want to be perceived as righteous, as virtuous. But the problem is, so in that context of wanting to be perceived as virtuous, let's pull in our friends, Jonathan Haidt and Greg Lukianoff again. Their book, The Coddling of the American Mind, which they've got more thoughts on this, by the way, in a new book, The Canceling of the American Mind, which I have it on good authority that's helpful as well. But they basically talk about one of the great untruths of our age is that life is a battle between good and evil people. Now, this really applies to free speech. And you see this played out dramatically on a lot of college campuses, actually, which is what they're referencing. But so, if life is a battle between good and evil people, this is, of course, morally loaded language right here. Then, if naturally we all tend to see ourselves as the good guy, as the good person, the righteous person, and the other, our opponent is evil. But if your opponent is evil, ends justify the means, and you really can take up arms against them in whatever ways you can, fight them as hard as you can, including banning their speech. Why? Well, they're evil, and their views are evil, and their views are actively pernicious. Now, this is maybe that double standard you were talking about, Nathan. So you can, one group, let's say, can say things that are unbelievably offensive. I'll give some. Let's just get specific. Okay, let's say you're a bunch of student demonstrators on the campus of Columbia University or Harvard, and you're marching around with pro-Palestine signs right in front of Jewish students. I can't think of anything that's more that can be more offensive, more hurtful, especially in the wake of the crimes that have been committed here. But if these Jewish students in this particular context, if they raise their voices, they try to speak up, they will meet with swift reprisal right there and then. So, but where's their free speech there? Well, here's the way that argument goes, Nathan. And I'm just trying to demonstrate a little bit of the logic that Nathan is pointing to, the really deeply flawed logic that's happening here. We've heard the arguments, haven't we, Nathan? Here's what they're going to be. Oh, so you're a pro-colonizer, aren't you? These people have been robbed of their land, and now you're standing up for these these oppressors who have stolen the land. These colonizers. This is the language that's used, with obviously heavily Marxist overtones here in a lot of this language, and so that's a matter of. So this is what I mean by cultural orthodoxy. So if you're in a certain progressive strain of thinking, this is the way this issue is lined out, and this is the way you're supposed to align yourself. And if any deviation from it, and if you bring up something like, even this is where we've seen this takes you into absolutely ludicrous territory and highly offensive. So this is if somebody brings up historical atrocities like the Holocaust, then you get statements from certain people trying to make qualifications there. Well, context really matters here. That's a gravely dangerous, not just insensitive. That's a very dangerous thing to say, especially when we're talking about something as pernicious as that. And in the meantime, what we are seeing is a real onslaught of anti-Semitism. Very, very alarming to my mind. Something, and we have a dear friend, you and I do, Nathan. He's an older saint and gentleman, and Not going to name him here, but he has some very hands-on experience with a lot of this stuff historically and all of that. And he is deeply concerned by the anti-Semitism that he's seeing
Mm-hmm.
on the scene right now. But again, just to highlight again, the flawed logic there, life is a battle between good and evil people here. So the way this is framed in this particular scenario of cultural orthodoxy, the people of Palestine are oppressed, period, and their land has been stolen from them unjustly by Israel. Israel are colonizers and wicked, and therefore what Hamas did was justified. And Nathan, just even you brought this up on the podcast not too long ago, that when some of these people, who attacked Israel were asked, what about you? You opened fire on kids at a concert. Oh, I didn't open fire on kids at the concert. I was attacking colonizers who were taking my land. They've adopted the language themselves, and they know how to speak that language as well. But this is part of that deeply flawed logic. And now you can go across the political spectrum and pick other issues where it looks a little bit different. But essentially, there's that double standard. We're free to make these statements, many of them outrageously offensive and horrendous. But if you speak back in any way, you'll be silenced and you'll be sorry.
So this is part of but in my mind, this is part of the beauty of free speech is, you're absolutely allowed to have that protest. You're absolutely allowed to protest and say what you think on a college campus. I think that's great.
Mm-hmm.
And then you shouldn't be surprised if a Jewish donor says, "And I'm not giving you $100 million to do that." That's not that's not oppression, and that's
a consequence that follows
logically from you saying, "I'm the type of person who fundamentally disagrees and maybe is anti the existence of you, who pays for my education." So what's going on there is that most of us, I don't want to use I'll use the word in the air quotes here, in the real world, assume a fundamental integrity between speech and action. But a lot of people don't. And this is where I think it gets challenging, because particularly from a biblical perspective, is there isn't a phenomenal amount of distinction that's made. In fact, when you look at God, speech and action are almost synonymous. I mean, that's where creation begins. God speaks and stuff. Like when God speaks, action happens. And then there's a extreme hypervigilance over words all throughout the Old Testament. And blessings and curses are treated as real things because it's seen as if the people of God action comes from speech. You have all the way to Jesus, out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks, about Jesus saying something like, "Let your yes be yes and your no be no. Anything else comes from the evil one." You have blessings rain down all throughout Proverbs on the person who is consistent and careful with their speech. You have, thinking Psalm 15 pops into my mind, of the righteous one who will enter the holy place. He who speaks the truth from his heart, has no slander on his tongue, goes on, who keeps his oath even when it hurts. All the way through the book of James. I mean, you cannot pull this apart in scripture and say that there's no place in scripture where it's felt that there's a disconnect between somebody's character and their future behavior and their speech. And so that's why, if you're seeking to live a life of integrity and you are somebody who actually does what you promise to do, and then you hear somebody say, "And I'm going to kill you," the logical thing is to say, well, that probably means that person hates me and is going to kill me. And so you're almost relying on that person not having integrity. So we live in a time in which blessings and curses flow so flippantly that it's only if you take words really, unseriously, can you even get into a situation where you can disconnect your speech from your actions. And then when somebody critiques an action, say, well, that's protected under free speech. So in the political atmosphere in which we live, modern United States, it's a great thing. But I think we have a much higher standard than that as Christians, when it comes to how we want to think about how we use our words, and then what's reasonable to expect from other people in the way they use their words. So, yeah, it's a blessing for sure. And I'm super grateful to live in a country that has that established. But I don't think that I want that. I see that as a minimum standard for integrating my speech and action and my integrity, not like the ideal that we're all trying to live up to. So maybe that's why this is a hard one for me.
Well, and I'm thinking of in the political realm, one of the famous lines that always sticks in my head on this one is George Bush Sr. Read my lips. No new taxes. Of course, there were new taxes
Okay.
because it's a
Yeah.
promise that he couldn't make. But it didn't matter because now it does matter, of course, but it didn't matter in the political sense because here the problem is in a nation as pragmatic as the United States, we look at language as a kind of crude tool to get what we want. I mean,
Oh,
it's
the other
very much it's rhetoric. Yeah,
well, the
go
also
ahead.
the debate over the definition of is. I think that was a political
Oh,
moment sometime in the
absolutely.
past. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, depends on what your definition of is. Yes. And it's funny, it's worth noting that I moved to the United States right in the middle, smack dab in the middle of the Clinton controversy and all of that. So that was a news item that was even on the news on our middle school news
Welcome to
in our
America.
school when I came to the States.
Anyway,
Welcome
so
to
politics
America.
is a place where this plays out.
Here's the
I got you off
sideshow.
track.
Yes, but we have a pronounced tendency to see speech as kind of, if we're not careful, as just a crude tool for getting what we want. You know, I hesitate to even use the word rhetoric because that assumes a higher degree of dignity and skill. So Greeks were in ancient Greece, they were very concerned about rhetoric and they were very concerned about skilled speech makers because those people were really good at manipulating you and getting stuff, using words to get what they want from you, not using it in any kind of, not in an honest sense, but in a cynical sense. Well, we've got that to the nth degree these days. We also have, I think, social media and different forms of technology have allowed for the spread of information. They've also allowed for the spread of disinformation. But one thing that they do that we don't often talk about is they allow for you can divorce your words from action in a whole radical new degree with social media. I
Ooh,
mean, you can create a fake
yeah.
persona. Basically, that's what we like. That's
Mhm.
what we do with. Yeah, I mean, you can say all sorts. You could online, of course, online abuse is a huge problem these days, and part of that is because people get to say all sorts of vicious stuff they'll never follow through on, but they could say it very easily, and they have the anonymity to hide behind, all of that. But it's the same principle as when you get behind the wheel of a car and you're driving down the highway and you begin to make all sorts of very vehement promises to people that let's hope you don't keep them.
Mhm.
But yeah, so
Well, actually,
it's easier than ever to divorce your words from actions.
okay, so actually, I really like that thought, but let me see your thought and raise you this one. It's also much
Hmm.
easier now to divorce your words from location. So even in the
Yeah.
past, if you were going to write something untrue, you had to write it down and mail it or print it in a newspaper
Hmm.
or a book. But now in real time, you can send a death threat to another part of the world or whatever, So our
Right.
words are no longer embodied nor located anywhere really in many of our forms of communication. And
Hmm.
that has to monkey with the way in which we
Right.
do understand the context or how seriously to take them or not. So, yeah, those are new features.
But then there are cases, like we're seeing today, where words do have very swift consequences. And so, such as, let's say, yeah, you're a professor at Columbia University. A heinous attack is perpetrated by Hamas, and you write a pro-Palestinian statement and make it available to all your students and give public access, and you label Israel as colonizers and all of that. And so then one of the wealthy donors who's given $50 million to Columbia University sees that and decides to pull his support from the organization.
Yeah. I mean,
Is that a threat to your free speech? No. It's a
no,
natural
I think
consequence
that's
for
actually how
being
that should
very
work.
reckless.
Mhm.
Right, exactly. So, yeah, I mean, and that's why also this is where a whole nother can of worms. We could do another show on what's labeled cancel culture, which is real in some instances, but in other instances, I think you could look at cases and you think, well, you said some unwise things and consequences followed. I think you have only yourself to thank for that, but your free speech is not under any threat there.
Well, also free speech does not mean that you're guaranteed a platform everywhere all the time. So, I mean, I can go out in my
No.
backyard and say whatever I want because I don't know, paying to rent that space. I don't know how you want to say it. I mean, it's not like everybody is entitled to a platform to speak from. So just because
Mhm.
somebody doesn't allow you access, but the thing with council culture is think of it like this. Um, because I think a lot of people on the more conservative side and Christians in particular are worried about cancel culture. And to a certain degree, I think we
Mhm.
have to
Sure.
evaluate that on a case by case thing and say, this is a very real problem some places. Other times it's just the logical outworking of your consequences. But other times, like your church doesn't let just whoever wants to preach on Sunday morning, would be my guess. I mean, is that how
No.
that works at your
Your
church?
church has community guidelines.
You get there and you like all vote and be like, well, this
No.
guy came in off the street. Let's let him give talk for the next half hour about what we think he thinks is important.
Mhm.
Um, so is that cancel
Right.
culture that your church doesn't let we could go through the list of like celebrities that your church wouldn't let speak in
No,
your
those are
pulpit, right? I mean,
right. No, those are community guidelines.
yeah, so your church
Yes.
is your church practicing cancel culture, but you're deplatforming them by saying that
Mhm.
I'm not even going to go out on a limb and pick somebody that I think your church wouldn't let speak, but it's a long list, I'm guessing. So anyway, there are places that we restrict not because we're anti-free speech, but because the
Milo
choice.
Yiannopoulos will not be speaking at my church.
I thought you were going
Just
Miley
kidding.
Cyrus, which would have both of those would work, but um,
Oh, yeah, well, probably not either. Yeah.
so
But
all that,
no,
yeah,
I think
you see my
yeah,
point.
I see your point. I think, and again, this is I think we've opened the topic and we've broached it. We'll probably have to go a little bit more deep. I think part two of when we talk about this should start with cancel culture actually, and look at because there are serious aspects to that are real and are an item of concern. But then there are other cases where we just think, no, I mean, I think we would say you've hasty statements were made or reckless statements or foolish statements and consequences followed. And, you know, we have to take, I mean, free speech doesn't mean that you won't have to take ownership for your words at times. See,
Hmm.
we have a remarkable luxury in the States often where we can say some extraordinarily thoughtless and reckless things. I mean, even think about our entertainment. Think about shows like South Park or Family Guy or Rick and Morty. So I've singled out. So these are all animated shows that have a reputation for being highly controversial, and they're very controversial because some of them can be clever and they can satirize a lot of subjects. But one of the things they do is they put a clear target on anything that is deemed sacred. So religion, I don't know, marriage, some of the formerly sacred institutions of Western culture are all targeted on these shows for absolutely relentless mockery. So, and that's one that's one aspect of American free speech. There's so much to celebrate, but there's also a serious flippancy when it comes to words, when everything becomes a joke
Hmm.
including death and war crimes and some of the worst imaginable things. All of them are singled out for laughter and derision in a lot of our just casual entertainment that our children are gobbling up. So that kind of flippancy regarding words that tends to lead us to not take words very seriously anymore. And even if you look at something like, and we've talked about this one before, Nathan, this is something that I deal with, but language language used to be taken a lot more seriously. People my parents' age, for instance, are appalled at the way I and some of my younger Christian friends talk. Nathan, this is you're not in this category as much. People, yeah, I am a Presbyterian, so my language can get a little bit more colorful. But there's a sense in which there's a looseness to that, where we're just that's a sign partly of that words are not taken as seriously. If you're using profane language, if you can do that very casually, that's a sign that you're not taking words as seriously. They don't
Hmm.
mean as much to you if there's a flippancy to that. And that I think is a very dangerous thing. And we see a lot of that. And that's why it can come as a shock to the system when you do say something flippantly and then you meet with swift consequences for it.
Yeah. What about this? So as I'm trying to piece together, condense a thought here, and getting around to an answer for the question that I asked. Is it too much to say that freedom of speech is not a divine right? It's not a human right, biblically speaking, but consistency and integrity between our words and our actions is certainly a divine expectation. And so
I'm
in
comfortable with
laying
that. Yeah.
yeah, in laying it out like that, I'm saying that free speech is great, but it's a minimum standard. It's not an ideal to
Hmm.
grow toward. So if it's not something I'm shooting for in life, as in like if only I can live up to free speech, if I say no, it's a minimum threshold for keeping our country functioning as it does. But actually, the calling that God has on my life for the way that I behave and the way that I think and speak and
Hmm.
the way that those three things are integrated is far higher. So I think this is just one of those cases when we're talking about speech as Christians where we want to recognize that we are shooting for a much higher standard, and so don't idolize free speech because it's a minimum, not the goal. And I think if I can keep that in the back of my mind, then that'll help me decide A, how I want to use my speech in my life, also what it is that I should be worried about, and what are the things that I can actually just laugh at and say that's ridiculous and move on with. So, as a result of listening to us chatter back and forth for about half an hour, that's what I've come to for now.
Yes, and I'm putting a placeholder down, a symbolic placeholder, Nathan, on this conversation because I think we'll come back to it. There's a lot
Mhm.
here. We've just scratched the surface. But thanks for tuning in and for listening to our rambling thoughts, as you always do, listeners. We appreciate it so much. You've been listening to Thinking Out Loud, a podcast where we think out loud about current events and Christian hope.
Thanks for listening to Thinking Out Loud. If you'd like to learn more about what we do, book Nathan or Cameron, or if you'd like to support us financially, whether through a one-time donation or on a monthly basis, you can do so on the donate page at www.toltogether.com. That's toltogether.com. And please consider leaving us a 5-star rating and sharing this content with your friends. It really does help.